Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining the webinar. We're going to go ahead and get started here. We're going to be talking about the Second Chance Act, Strengthening Relationships Between Young Fathers and Their Children, a Reentry Mentoring Project, also known as the Young Fathers Mentoring Grant. My name is Ronin Davis. I oversee the Community Initiatives portfolio here at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Community initiatives includes adult mentoring, young fathers mentoring, children of incarcerated parents, and technology-based career training grantees. I'm joined today by Mark Roscoe, Senior Policy Advisor at the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. So here's the agenda for today's webinar. After the introductions, we'll give an overview of the Young Fathers Mentoring Grant Program and OJJDP's expectations and goals for this program. We'll then discuss the different types of support available to you as a Second Chance Act awardee, including technical assistance from the National Reentry Resource Center and the Planning and Implementation Guide, a tool that we will utilize as part of that technical assistance. We will then have time at the end for questions. Throughout the course of the webinar, feel free to send questions using the Q&A box at the bottom right-hand corner of your WebEx screen. The Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention, or OJJDP, envisions a nation where children are healthy, educated, and free from violence, and where contact with the juvenile justice system is rare, fair, and beneficial. Together with the Bureau of Justice Assistance, OJJDP has supported Second Chance Act reentry programs since 2009. There are various ways to stay up to date on the latest news and information from OJJDP. Please visit ojjdp.gov/e-news to sign up for the News at a Glance newsletter, the JuvJust news service, and be sure to follow OJJDP on social media. The Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. Technical assistance for your Second Chance Act grant is provided by the National Reentry Resource Center, which is funded by the Bureau of Justice Assistance and managed by us here at the Justice Center. The NRRC provides support to all Second Chance Act grantees and the broader field of reentry. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. We encourage everyone who hasn't done so already to sign up for the newsletter at the website listed on this slide. Now we're going to discuss the Young Fathers Mentoring Grant. First off, congratulations to everyone on the phone. Each of your programs are offering unique approaches to the fields of reentry, mentoring, and responsible fatherhood. This slide shows all of the FY15 grantees. Since last year, OJJDP has awarded nearly $5 million to young father mentoring grantees in 12 different states. You can see on this slide where all those mentoring programs are for the FY14 cohort and for your cohort here in FY15. Many factors went into the development of this grant program. One of those factors is President Obama's My Brother's Keeper initiative. One of the 6 milestones of My Brother's Keeper is keeping kids on track and giving them second chances. This grant serves young fathers returning to their communities and their families after serving time in jail, prison, or detention. As part of the Second Chance Act, this program is meant to give these fathers a second chance and support them in getting back on track. In 2005, President Obama established the White House Office of Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships and asked that they focus on 4 special priorities, which include promoting responsible fatherhood and strong communities. There are now 13 federal centers for faith-based and neighborhood partnerships, including one at the Department of Justice, where the director, Eugene Schneeberg, has played a critical role in the development of this particular grant program. The purpose of this grant program is to reduce recidivism among young fathers, improve outcomes for young fathers, their children, and family members, and promote responsible fatherhood. The target population for this grant must be young fathers who are enrolled prior to their 25th birthday, held in a secure confinement facility at the time of enrollment, and are at moderate and or high risk of reoffending. Risk to reoffend or criminogenic risk should be determined by an empirically reviewed criminogenic risk assessment tool administered to program participants prior to their enrollment. I'd also like to note that when talking about young fathers, there is leeway around who's fulfilling that role of father in a child's life. And that's something that we can discuss in more detail with your technical assistance provider. All programs are required to provide mentoring services to young fathers pre-release where possible and post-release. Additionally, programs need to provide young fathers with transitional and reentry services focusing on the needs of young fathers and reducing recidivism. This includes sustained case management and adequate staff training. Data collection is a key activity for all Second Chance Act programs. This includes tracking participants' recidivism and comparing it against a baseline recidivism rate that matches the definition used to track participants' recidivism, as well as following up on other outcomes, including successful mentoring pairings, employment, increased child support payments, improved family engagement, and others. We just held a webinar, I just want to point out, on engaging families and measuring the outcomes for family members and for children when serving young fathers. It's available on the Justice Center website, and many of the grantees on this call were part of that webinar as well. But that's some of the technical assistance that we can provide is providing assistance around these outcome measures, performance measurement, program evaluation, and those types of issues. This grant program is divided into two phases, planning and implementation. Grantees may take up to a year for the planning phase, where they will work on a planning and implementation guide, or P&I guide, together with their TA provider, which will be described in more detail later. The P&I guide will help you and your TA provider support you in moving into the implementation phase. Now we're going to go over some of the different types of support that are available to grantees. So there are three main types of support available to Second Chance Act grantees. Your OJJDP program specialist is available to assist you with any grant management needs, including budget approval and modifications and proposed changes in the scope of your program. Later on in the presentation, I'll point out who your program specialist is, but it should be noted if you have any questions about your grant program, they're definitely the person that you can go to. The PMT, which is used to report on data from your program, is administered by CSR Inc. Any technical issues regarding that performance measurement tool can be brought to them. Then there is technical assistance from the Council of State Governments National Reentry Resource Center. Technical assistance providers, or TA providers, offer a wide variety of support related to content, implementation, and facilitation. Each grantee will be assigned a TA provider from the NRRC to support you as you plan to implement your reentry mentoring program. For this cohort of Young Fatherhood Mentoring Grants, I will be your TA provider and will be reaching out to each of you to set up an introductory call in the next month. Each of you will also be supported by Patrick Dunkhorst, who I mentioned before is your program specialist at OJJDP. Any questions regarding your grant can be directed to Patrick, and I'm also available to help with any questions regarding your program, and we'll talk more about the role of your TA provider when we set up our introductory call. So as your NRRC TA provider, I can provide support in a number of ways. For instance, as you complete the required P&I guide, you will find that your TA provider is available to field any of your questions, then review and provide constructive feedback on the guide. Also, as your TA provider, my aim is to work with you to identify and execute a tailored technical assistance plan that takes into account the importance of tracking progress with grant deliverables and collaboratively finding solutions to any barriers you might face along the way. Finally, the NRRC's mission is to advance the reentry field through knowledge transfer and dissemination and to promote evidence-based best practices. As such, we will ask your permission to share any successes with reducing recidivism or creative solutions to the challenges of bridging the gap between theory and practice with entities such as stakeholders, your peers who also have grant programs, and possibly through products that the Justice Center aims to publish in the future. The NRRC strives to provide ongoing support that is responsive to each grantee's unique needs. This often includes assisting with data collection and analysis, training on what works to reduce recidivism and improve other outcomes, helping to translate research into proposed policy and practice improvements, supporting the development of implementation and/or sustainability plans, as well as connecting you to other grantees doing similar work. Here are 6 of the primary methods by which the NRRC delivers technical assistance. Regular monthly phone calls between program staff and the TA provider. These calls should include any staff overseeing day-to-day operations of the program. At times, it may be useful to bring in line staff and partner agencies, depending on the focus of each call. Peer learning opportunities may include webinars tailored to a specific set of programs that will allow you and your peers to troubleshoot shared challenges and discuss strategies. This may also include TA providers putting you in touch with other grantees or organizations that have worked through similar issues. The NRRC hosts a number of webinars on a variety of topics, as well as promotes webinars from across the fields of reentry, mentoring, and behavioral health. We also have partnerships with the National Fatherhood Initiative and work with them to produce additional products specific to the fatherhood field. The NRRC contracts with a number of consultants who can provide expert trainings on select topics, as well as assist you in finding trainings in your area. Your TA provider will pass along relevant and useful resources, but be sure to sign up for the NRRC newsletter to learn about the latest resources being made available to the field. And lastly, the NRRC does conduct site visits that are designed to assist you and your staff in your implementation process. These site visits are not audits of your program. They may include facilitating stakeholder meetings, conducting trainings, conducting assessments and interviews to determine where support may be needed, among other focuses. And the site visits are meant to be a collaborative effort between you and your TA provider to determine what your needs are and address those needs. Another important opportunity that the NRRC and OJJDP provide to grantees is the Second Chance Act Conference held in Washington, D.C. Each grantee should have budgeted to send staff to the conference, which will take place December 16th through December 18th. The conference will offer a wide variety of workshops and plenaries to support your work. If you are able to send multiple staff to the conference, we encourage you to spread out and check out multiple workshops. There will be a wide variety of topics covered. This slide highlights workshops that will be especially relevant to your grant program. You'll see 2 meetings in red, which are required for FY15 Young Fathers grantees. On the first day of the conference, there will be a mandatory meeting for FY15 grantees where you will have the opportunity to meet with OJJDP, the NRRC, and other key partners in this initiative. On December 17th, there will be a meeting for all young father grantees, including the FY14 cohort and the new Children of Incarcerated Parents grant. As mentioned previously, there will be a Planning and Implementation Guide, or P&I Guide, designed to assist you and your TA provider. The guide will be made available to grantees around the time of the conference. The guide will assist you and your TA provider in developing an implementation plan to submit to OJJDP in order to move on to the implementation phase. You and I will work together on this guide as we move through the first year of your grant. Each section of the guide includes exercises for grantees to self-assess how program activities align with evidence-based practices and other recommendations, as well as identify areas of success and challenges. You'll see here the different sections of the guide. I'd like to draw particular attention to sections 4 and 5, which are going to focus on mentoring services and responsible fatherhood, family support, and family engagement. those are the sections of the P&I guide that have been tailored specifically to your grant program. In your planning in your planning and implementation guide, in the Appendix A provides various resources you can utilize to assist with your program. You'll see on this slide a few of those resources. There are a few that I'd like to highlight. Many of you have probably heard of the Healthy Marriage and Responsible Fatherhood grants through the Department of Health and Human Services, and many of you may have even been recipients of this grant. The website for those grant programs provides significant resources to the public, as well as a database of different fatherhood programs around the country. The National Mentoring Resource Center is a project funded through OJJDP and run through the National Mentoring Partnership, and it provides technical assistance to mentoring programs serving youth. The Fatherhood Research and Practice Network provides useful information about measuring and evaluating fatherhood programs, and they took part in the webinar I mentioned earlier that was hosted on November 4th. Additional resources include the National Responsible Fatherhood Clearinghouse, which is a government website that provides lots of information on fatherhood support and fatherhood programs, the Office of Child Support Enforcement through the Administration for Children and Families, and SAMHSA's National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. But there are a lot more resources available in the actual P&I guide. Appendix B talks about programs serving juvenile populations. Even if your program isn't technically serving juveniles, the 18 to 24-year-old population is still considered transitional age youth. Youth have different needs and often require a different approach in service provision than adults. Appendix B of the guide features information on research-based principles for reducing recidivism and improving other youth outcomes. These principles are detailed in a white paper that was released by the Justice Center in 2014. Please check it out and other resources for programs serving youth by visiting csgjusticecenter.org/youth. So now we'll go ahead and open up the webinar for questions. As I mentioned earlier in the webinar, at the bottom right-hand screen, you should have a Q&A box where you can submit questions. So feel free to submit any questions in that box, and we'll be able to move forward with providing answers to those questions.
Good afternoon, Ronan, and good afternoon, Grantees. Ronan, I'd like to make just a few quick comments, if I could, while we're waiting for questions.
Yes, please, go ahead.
In one of the slides, you talked about the role of the program manager and the role of you as a TA provider. I want the grantees to very clearly understand that it's a team-oriented concept we have here in collaboration between our agency and yours, but also to make sure that they understand that Patrick is their primary source of contact and that their daily interactions beyond the grant administration should also go through him as we go through this planning and implementation phase. Once we get into talking more about site visits, once we go on facilitating technical assistance through your organization, we want to make sure that the grantees and program managers are always on the same page. The second point I want to make related to that is that on the monthly calls, grantees and the program managers and staff of OJJDP, such as myself, as well as you, it's not going to be just directed by us. We want the grantees to have a lot of input in terms of things they're experiencing as they roll this program out, and so that our interactions together monthly are useful, impactful, and they're getting the most out of it. And most importantly, we want to connect them together as as peers, technical assistance peers to one another, because there might be grantees that may have one aspect of programming down, and we want to connect them as collaborations and partners within this program. And I'll stop there, but maybe there will be some questions around that, but I just want to make sure that we want the best out of this program and for the grantees as we roll out this TA and program initiative.
Thank you, Mark. So just echoing what Mark was saying, specifically regarding the P&I guide, the way that this will work is someone asked if there's currently a template for the P&I guide. So the P&I guide is an existing document that we've developed that we're going to send out to all of the grantees to use, and it's a self-assessment, but it is something that we're going to work on together. So if there's any questions as you're working through it, we'll be able to help you fill that out. And then we're going to use that P&I guide to help determine what the focus will be for TA as you move forward into implementation. As Mark was saying, this is a collaborative process between the NRRC, OJJDP, and yourselves. So what will happen is you and I the grantees and myself will work together on this P&I guide, and then we'll provide that to OJJDP, and they'll provide their feedback as well. And we'll work together to develop a final product before moving on to implementation. All right, just seeing if there's another question on here. So it says, what is the expected start date on this grant as it pertains to when our planning phase begins? So I'm going to answer this, but then I might pass it on to you, Mark, to make sure I got this right. So technically, your grant officially started in October. However, we understand that getting budgets approved and just getting certain logistics underway sometimes takes a little bit of time. So while you have up to a year for the planning phase, and when I say up to a year, that also means you could complete the planning phase before that year is up. I believe there's some leeway if the planning phase, for whatever reason, if there are logistical issues or administrative challenges that cause it to go past October 2016, that would be okay. But Mark, let me just run that by you to see if that's actually true.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. There's always some slippage given when we put our awards out, given when we get our appropriations, whether or not we have a continuing resolution, any of these outstanding factors that could slow down the implementation of an initiative. We always have leeway on the back end for a couple of sites that may need to extend that initial phase several months beyond the end date. So yes, you're right.
Great. And then I know that there's also the possibility of if your program is starting later and so you don't use your funds completely in the time period allotted, no-cost extensions is an option available to grantees if needed at the end of the award period. We have another question. Does funding automatically roll over between planning and implementation periods? And they gave an example. If funding was earmarked for planning period but unspent, is it automatically available for implementation period, or is a budget modification required? So as there's a slide earlier in the presentation that pointed out that during your planning phase you have $50,000 available to you, and during the implementation phase the remainder of your grant funds become available. So the way it worked with the FY14 cohort, and I believe is the case this year, is if you don't need to use the entire $50,000 for planning and you move on to implementation, you're not losing, I don't believe you lose the remainder of those planning funds. I believe they roll over to your implementation phase. Is that correct, Mark?
Yes, generally what we do in these kinds of programs where we phase it, planning and implementation. If you don't use all those funds, we like to do a scope change and reprogram them into program implementation.
Okay, great. Thank you. You see a question just regarding who should be attending the Second Chance Act conference next month, which is a good common question that we've been getting. So two things to consider when thinking about who you're going to send to the conference. Obviously, someone who is working in the program overseeing day-to-day operations. So program director, program manager, someone who's involved in the program's day-to-day work is definitely someone who would benefit from attending the conference. Sending line staff, they also would benefit from attending the conference, but having a balance between a decision maker in the program as well as line staff is definitely positive. The other thing to consider is if any of your programs are working with evaluators, like an independent evaluator for your program, If you have the funds and if staffing works out this way, it definitely would be beneficial to have your evaluator attend. They're going to be, actually I'll go back to this slide just so you can see, at the conference, there is a workshop on December 18th around evaluating mentoring programs and specifically in community-based organizations. So this would be a good opportunity for grantees and their evaluators to learn about some of the steps involved in partnering with an evaluator to have an evaluation for your mentoring program. And then there are going to be some other workshops that aren't mentoring specific, but are about partnering with evaluators and what researching these reentry programs can look like. So I want to put that out there as one of the possibilities. But generally, folks involved in the day-to-day work, program managers, program directors, a case manager, if you're able to send one, they definitely could benefit from attending the conference. I'll go back to the contact slide here. Okay, so I see another question that just came in. Is there a time frame that we need to recruit participants if they are released, or must they be in confinement at the time of enrollment? So my understanding of this grant solicitation is they must be in confinement at the time of enrollment. So the key part of the program is providing pre-release services and reentry planning. Another question was, will the evaluation session be recorded at the conference that we could share with the evaluator, in case they're not able to attend? I'm actually not sure. I don't believe that particular session will be recorded. We're limited on the resources for which sessions can be recorded. I believe our plenary sessions will be. I'm not sure how many workshops will be recorded. So at this moment, I don't think this one will be recorded. However, resources that are provided in those workshops, we're going to make available to grantees online so that you'd be able to take those back with you. All right. So we'll give it just a couple more minutes here just to see if there are any other questions. Oh, also another thing I just remembered regarding the evaluation session. The evaluation session that I pointed out that's focused on mentoring programs is the beginning of a conversation that we want to have with mentoring grantees around evaluation. It's a big push from, I think, the Department of Justice as a whole, but I know that for adult mentoring grantees, the Bureau of Justice Assistance is definitely talking a lot more about partnering with evaluators. And I know that's something that OJJDP is interested in seeing as well, regarding seeing these programs evaluated. So we set up this particular conference workshop to be the beginning of the conversation, and going through 2016, we're intending to have more events, whether that's in webinar form or peer-to-peer calls where we're talking with evaluators and grantees who are already doing this or who are planning on doing this work to provide more information about what those partnerships will look like, how to develop them, when you should start meeting and talking about different issues. One piece of advice is that we often talk about is meeting with your evaluator early on in the process so that they are, in a way, a part of the planning, especially when you're trying to determine what performance measures, what outcome indicators you want to look at. They definitely should be a part of those conversations. So we're going to be trying to hold more events. So if this workshop at the conference can't be recorded, we do intend to have more events that should be available online that you can either attend or watch after the fact. All right, I think there's another question here. Yes, are there quarterly program and fiscal reports due if we have not officially started the planning phase? I think I'm going to let Mark field that question. I will say with the officially starting the planning phase, I think technically we're going to begin, the planning phase will begin when you start meeting with your TA provider and and with your program specialist at OJJDP, even if maybe nothing has been completed yet. So there might be reports due, but I'll go ahead and pass that on to Mark regarding those quarterly program and fiscal reports.
Right. The answer is yes. Because you do have a start date of October 1, you will have quarterly reports, fiscal reports that are due, and semi-annual reports. So when that fiscal report comes up and you don't have expenditures, you have to submit, but you just say on the report, no activity as of this date, because actual start date of the project began in this month. So you are responsible for the whole reporting period, but you only can report on what you've actually expended and the work you've actually done. Our Office of the Chief Financial Officer knows that oftentimes programs don't begin right on time, and you just report on the work that you've done. You can't report on something you've not done, but you still have reporting requirements dating back to the beginning of the project period.
Thanks, Mark. All right, still open for some more questions if there's any other anyone has any other questions. We kind of moved through that presentation kind of quickly, so I want to make sure if there's anything that you missed or if there's any follow-up that you'd like, we can definitely address that. I also want to point out, I mentioned that there is this opportunity for, at the conference, for you to interact with the FY14 grantees who received the same grant that you did. There were some differences, minor differences, between last year's Young Fatherhood grant and this year, the one that you received. However, there should be at least one representative from each of those FY14 grantees at the conference. So I really, while we're going to try and make a space for you to interact, I definitely encourage you to meet with them and talk with them about their experiences, having gone through this grant already for a year and a half at this point. Their experiences are definitely valuable. And then as your TA provider, I definitely would do my part to make sure we have opportunities for all the grantees to share in different ways, depending on what the issues are. It might be one-to-one, or it might be everyone on a call together, just depending on what it is. I think I just saw another one come in. Yes. If we do not have an approved indirect cost rate, do we need to request one to be allowed to do we need to request one to be allowed to charge indirect costs to this grant? So that's one I don't know the answer to. Mark, are you able to cover that one?
Yes, the answer is absolutely. If you have plans to charge against indirect cost rate, you must have a approved rate before you do that, because otherwise that will come up as an audit finding later, and you will not be able to have be a legal expenditure. You have to have that rate approved before making those expenditures.
Great, thank you, Mark. All right, so we'll let one more minute for questions here, if anyone else has anything they'd like to ask. All right, so we'll go ahead and wrap up. I just wanted to take you back to one slide before we close out. So this is just as a reminder, your program specialist at OJJDP is Patrick Dunkhorst. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to join the call today, but he is going to be your primary contact at OJJDP, and this is his contact information. You'll also see my contact information here. I'll be reaching out, like as I said, in the next month to set up our first call just to do introductions and talk about the TA process. We'll also have the opportunity to meet at the conference, and you'll also have the opportunity to meet with Mark, Patrick, and other officials from the Office of Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention. And in addition to meeting with other fatherhood grantees, there's such a wide variety of Second Chance Act grantees that will be at this conference. including adult mentoring grantees, some of whom work in parenting programs, some who focus specifically on fatherhood or on transitional age youth in the 18 to 25-year-old group. And then there are a lot of grantees, the majority of Second Chance Act grantees actually are local government agencies, including departments of corrections, county governments, state governments. So one thing that I definitely encourage you to do as nonprofit agencies is to take advantage of those opportunities to talk about, as you have to partner with correctional or detention agencies, there will be folks representing from that perspective at the conference, and it might be a good opportunity to talk to them about what those partnerships could look like. And we'll have some workshops that also talk about that. All right, so if there are no more questions, we'll go ahead and wrap up. We'll go ahead and conclude the webinar. We will email a link out to the recording of this presentation, as well as a link to a PDF of the PowerPoint slides used in the presentation in the coming weeks. These links will also be made available on the National Reentry Resource Center's website, which is csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. As I mentioned earlier, we do have a newsletter that I encourage you to sign up for. In addition to receiving updates on critical information about the field, we also provide information about upcoming trainings, webinars, updates on events like the conference and other similar events. So I definitely encourage you to check that out. Earlier in the presentation, I did mention the website where you can sign up for OJJDP's updates, which is ojjdp.gov/e-news. Where they provide a lot of very useful information about the field of juvenile justice and juvenile reentry, as well as connections to other information from similar federal agencies and departments. So thank you all again for joining us today. I really look forward to meeting you at the conference and working with you over the life of your grants and on, I hope. So thank you all again, and thank you, Mark, for joining us and presenting on OJJDP.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Have a wonderful day, everyone.